Hello everyone, we are back again to do another review, this time of one of my, I have to say, my top 10 anime series ever, Parasyte. And I put it in that list simply because it is one of the most fascinating philosophical views of what it means to be human. So for anyone who has watched Parasyte, I will probably do a little spoiler zone where I geek out more at the end of this video, but for now, for those of you who have not watched it, I will try not to share too much. This series follows a boy, a young man, as is pretty constant in every anime series ever. Not very original, but there we go. Young boy, high school. His name is Shinichi, and he woke up one day in the middle of the night freaking out because there's something in his arm, and he managed to tie off his arm and stop this little thing from coming up into his body. Unfortunately for him, that little thing was a parasitical alien, which got trapped in his arm, unfortunately, and could not make it to his brain, where it would have eaten his brain and taken over his entire body, and that would have been the end of the story. Unfortunately, because of Shinichi's quick thinking, he was able to trap it inside of his arm, where it became Migi. It became his right hand. And they had to have a partnership. They had to come to an agreement of how to live symbiotically in this body. At the beginning, Migi is very analytical. Everything is about rationality, logic. He's a creature, and all he cares about is survival in the most rational sense. And Shinichi, of course, is this young high school boy. He's a bit geeky, a bit dorky, smart kid, very gentle. And he's, of course, freaking out because there is an alien living in his body. And he cannot tell anyone for two reasons. One, because Migi threatens him, threatens to hurt anyone he cares about if he reveals his identity, and manages also to logically convince him that if he hands himself over to the government will just turn him into a, basically, test subject, which is not something a high school boy wants to be. As the story progresses, they both change each other. As Migi gets to know more of the human world and develops more as an entity and sees the world through Shinichi's eyes, Shinichi also gets changed by him physiologically, becoming more powerful, becoming more unfearful, becoming less human in his thinking, and vice versa. So they both change each other. And Parasyte is fascinating because it really delves into what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be the apex predator? Because that's what humans are. Even though many people don't like to think about that, especially these days with the vegan craziness and all that, people don't want to accept the fact that human beings, we're just part of the natural life cycle of the planet, life and death. Something lives, something dies. That's how every bit of life on this planet survives, from the smallest insect to the largest mammal. Okay, something's living, something's dying. That's how it is. Plants, same thing. Everything is living and dying. And humans, by becoming so populous and so powerful due to our technology, we became that apex predator. Almost nothing feeds on us anymore, except for the occasional accident with a wild animal. It's very, very rare that a human being dies from being eaten by something. But to the parasites who have taken over these other humans, humans are food. That's what we are to them. And Shinichi has to deal with that, deal with the fact that one of these things is inside of him, but does not eat humans. Yet there's these other parasites who are eating humans, yet they think of it as just completely normal. Why is it okay for human beings to eat an animal, but not for something to eat humans? Which, if you think about it as rationally as possible, there is nothing wrong with that. We are animals. If a lion eats us, does that make the lion a monster? Of course not. We're just food. We're just another piece of meat to the lion. And it was the same thing for these parasitical creatures. But because they were also sentient, because they could think, because they could talk, because they also took over a human body, it became this monstrous psychological, terrorizing thing to Shinichi and to anyone who discovered their existence. But to them, they were just looking for purpose, looking for survival, and humans were food to them. And they couldn't understand this idea that humans thought that they were beyond the food chain. So it becomes this really, really fascinating look into this view, because you get to see how some of these creatures are thinking about this, and you also get to see Shinichi's own internal drama as he tries to come to terms with these creatures' existence, but also the fact that he is one of them to a small degree, even though he is obviously not eating people, and neither is Miggy. I keep pointing at my left hand. It's really frustrating me because Miggy's in the right. In the right hand. Miggy's here. Okay? Miggy actually means, I believe, right hand in Japanese. That's why he calls him that. So for those people who are looking for a great philosophical look on sort of what does it mean to be human, Parasyte is a phenomenal series. On top of that, the series is paced pretty well. There are some moments which kind of stutters a little bit as they're trying to figure things out. They go from extremes to back to normalcy, although I think that is part of the story. It's Shinichi trying to like retain this human life and then being suddenly thrust into like this crazy secret fight that's happening between the parasites and humans. So he's constantly shifting back and forth, but they do the pacing pretty well. The action scenes, when they do happen, are fantastic. Shinichi's fights with the other parasites are really, really well done, and how the series attempts to show him and Miggy working together to beat these many times more powerful parasites is done really well. His relationships with people around him, they're kind of weird, which I've talked about this before. The Japanese have very, very strange views on relationships, at least within anime series. There are relationships that seem to basically be going all over the place and nothing's really happening between them, and then all of a sudden there's intimate moments that are like, they go to extremes out of nowhere. So I definitely think the relationships are chaotic. I didn't really feel much at all for most of Shinichi's relationships with the two females who are his love interests in the series. His relationship with his father is kind of strange. His friendships seem kind of redundant. So I really find a lot of the side characters don't add anything. The only real interesting character, to me at least, is Shinichi and Miggy and the relationship between the two of them and how they're dealing with scenarios. But his romantic relationships are just strange, even for a high school kid. They don't make much sense at all, even with all the stuff that he's dealing with. It's simply, again, I think it's just a cultural difference between us here in North America and how the Japanese see things sometimes, which again, you can push past it because the overall story and still the relationships were fine. They're not like this horrendous. There was no edgy. I think if I can give this, I will give this series literally a 9 on 10 just for the fact that there was no ecchi, no dumb sexuality, no idiocy for no reason. It was mainly, there was a little bit of humor done here and there, but it had sense to it. There was nothing, this is a violent series, people. This is something that there is brutality, there is people being eaten alive, there is death all over the place. There's the psychological trauma of a young boy who's been inhabited by a parasitical alien and he's trying to keep it away from everyone. The trauma as he slowly, in some instances, practically loses himself and loses his mind because he's terrified, because he's just a young boy and he doesn't know what to do. And that is really showcased well, and they do not ruin it in the series like many other anime do by inputting dumb humor or ecchi just to satisfy young children. So I think they really, really pulled it off well. And just like some other series, they managed to not fall into those tropes that many anime do, which are just the way for an anime series to try to reach a younger audience so that they can make some money. They cared about their story, they stuck to that, and they did it really, really well. So I'm gonna get into a few spoilers right now, so anyone who doesn't want to get spoiled, move along. I would definitely have to say, if you are someone who likes enemies, we'll say, you like a developed enemy, you like someone who has much personality, you're not going to find that in this series. And I think anyone who's watched it, now that we're in the spoiler-free zone, in the non-spoiler-free zone, will agree that the enemies in Parasyte, in general, are kind of one-sided. Besides Tamura, she was really, really fascinating. Her development as an enemy, her development with her child, all that was phenomenal. But all the other Parasytes are pretty boring. They're pretty one-sided, and that's what makes it really great, because you had this one Parasyte who was super, super fascinating, and then all the rest of them were just these brutal, man-eating creatures who just didn't give a shit. They were phenomenal. I really, really like that stuff. So anyone who's complained about how I've seen that a little bit, where people complain about how the characters tend to be kind of one-sided. I think they did it really well in that way, because they showcase how the Parasytes can be different and how unique Tamura was. So that was well done, in my opinion. Shinichi, on the other hand, even though he was really, really developed in a way that allowed you to see that he was a young boy, and I just find that if most young boys, if they suddenly became physically that strong, that dominant, that they could have these abilities, even with all the scariness of all the rest of the stuff, they would have taken some enjoyment, some pleasure about the fact that they could jump out of a 3-story window and land on their feet like it was nothing, be that strong, smash through a wall. Shinichi took no physical pleasure in his abilities, which I don't think would be realistic. Even though there was all that fear and that terror, I think a young male would just have given into that kind of rage and anger and violence that's kind of all there in us when we're very young. Now, again, maybe the reason they didn't showcase it like that is because of Miggy's effect of kind of stultifying his emotions. But eventually his emotions get kind of unlocked. He cries, he kind of frees himself. And I think they should have showed him kind of, I don't know, I feel like it would have been a little bit more interesting to see him enjoy his abilities to some degree, or at least showcase him attempting to use them and develop them. Instead, he was just constantly trying to push it away, which I don't think was realistic, because eventually he thought of Miggy as a friend. So I don't see why he would have continued to dislike how he was with his abilities. So that's definitely something I didn't really like. I really wish they would have developed it a little bit more. But you can't have everything, unfortunately. I would also like to mention the fact that, as I said before, I really think Shinichi's relationship with his girlfriend is one of the dumbest relationships I've ever seen. Like, this girl stays with him, but just thinks he's a weirdo, that he's a freak. She doesn't question the fact that he jumped out of a 3-story window and then jumped over a fence. What kind of person doesn't question how a guy jumped out of a fucking window and then leaped over a fence? It's not human. Doesn't make any sense that she doesn't ask him questions. She doesn't ask him why he doesn't wear glasses anymore. She doesn't ask him, where the fuck is your mom? What happened with your mom? You know, there's a lot of things, and then the relationship goes from just this awkward, we don't know what's happening, we're fighting, and then all of a sudden they have sex. It was too much. It's too erratic. It drove me banana splits in some instances how their relationship was developed. That other girl who had the sense of him, who could sense him being around, I don't know why I'm blanking on her name right now, but she was one of the dumbest side stories I've ever seen in an anime. I just didn't understand the point of her. She was basically a complete stranger to him. They almost spoke never. She sensed him, therefore she thought he was the love of her life. He didn't think about her at all. She was just this weird girl who he was trying to get away from him. And yet, there's this little romance stuff. It was just kind of redundant. It didn't really add to the story in the slightest. It was just this distraction on the side for no reason. And then when she died, it became pointless. I didn't find it served the story at all. So that was one of probably the most annoying side plots to the storyline. I also found how Shinichi just kind of became human at the end. He said, like, I'm not as strong as I used to be anymore. I've lost the sense is that because Migi is dormant, that he's gone away, that Shinichi would lose his physical abilities, but that makes no sense because Migi makes it quite clear that when he entered into Shinichi's heart to save him, that his cells spread out and he had no more communication with them. Now, if he has no more communication with him and he's still living inside of Shinichi's body, it's not like he vanishes. He's still living within Shinichi's body. He's just completely gone dormant. All his cells are still there. Shinichi should still be just as strong and just as fast as he was before. So that was a bit strange that he was losing his strength at the end. But it was interesting. It was interesting how they flipped it around near the end and really made it that Migi had become more close to Shinichi. He'd become more human. He wanted to give Shinichi the opportunity to live on his own so that he could just be a human being and continue on with his life. So that was really good. It was actually a very beautiful ending. They managed to take something that was so violent and so brutal and turn it into this kind of interspecies philosophical bromance, really. Even though Migi doesn't really have a sex, but it's just this, they developed this close friendship between the two of them where they both needed each other to survive. And even though they had so much trouble understanding each other, they became inseparable. They became one. And Migi's sacrifice at the end, even though he obviously didn't kill himself, but just letting go so that he could develop himself even further, but also allow Shinichi to live on and just be a normal human, it was really touching. It was beautiful. There was a lot of little moments of beauty within this series, like Tamura giving the child over to Shinichi and allowing it to be a human because she understood that she was not right for it. And she was still developing human emotion towards the child and a motherly feeling, even though she was just this creature who's inhabiting the body. All those little moments of beauty really meant something, even because there were so few of them. Just smashed into so much violence and horror. So the series really, really just paced itself well, managed not to go down these tropey, dumb paths of stupid humor and ecchi. It had phenomenal action series, and just managed to make you care about the character, which is hard to do in a lot of anime. A lot of times you just don't care about the character. You care about the world, you care about the action, you care about the bang bang and the boom boom that's happening in the anime series, but you don't really care that much about the character because they're usually not developed that well. But Shinichi was developed pretty damn well, and I would highly recommend checking out this series. I'd have to say I'd give it a 9 on 10. I would have to say for people who like those kind of philosophical, deep thinking anime, this is a 9 on 10. If you're just looking at it like you're a regular anime watcher and you tend to like more kinds of series like Naruto and Bleach and those kinds of things, definitely you probably think of this more of as 7 on 10 because it gets a little bit too deep. There's no real breaks in the violence. It's just a little bit too meandering. For those people, I think you think it's 7 out of 10. It's worth a watch. You won't get fully that into it. But if you're someone who really enjoys more of a philosophical viewpoint on things and what it means to be human, I would definitely say this bumps it up to a 9 out of 10. So check it out. If you like the review, like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think. Check out the website, GeeksnBarbells.com. And I will be back soon with more reviews. I'm finishing up the regular at Magic High School. Yes, and I'm doing Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and I will be reviewing those. We will be figuring out how to make these reviews even better as I go along because I have no idea what I'm doing, but it's still fun. So thanks for checking us out, and I will see you soon.